August 7th, 1944. Villers-Bocage, Normandy, France. Oberscharführer Hans Becker sat in the commander's cupola of his Panther tank, scanning the devastated French countryside through his periscope. The morning mist clung to the hedgerows like funeral shrouds, and somewhere beyond, the shattered stone walls, he could hear the unmistakable rumble of American armor approaching. Becker commanded one of Germany's most feared weapons, a Panzerkampfwagen Five Panther medium tank. Its sloped armor, engineered to deflect enemy shells like water off glass, measured 100 millimeters thick at the front. The long-barreled 75-millimeter gun could penetrate enemy armor at ranges exceeding 1,000 meters. In his 2 years commanding Panthers on the Eastern Front, Becker had destroyed 23 Soviet tanks, each kill meticulously recorded in his unit's combat log. He felt supremely confident. The Americans, he'd been told, fielded the M4 Sherman, a tank his instructors at the Panzer training school in Paderborn had dismissed as barely adequate. 75-millimeter gun, thin armor, high profile. German intelligence reports called it a rolling coffin. On paper, the Panther was superior in every measurable way. What Becker didn't know, what no German tank commander in Normandy truly understood that summer morning, was that he was about to face something far more terrifying than superior enemy technology. He was about to confront American industrial capacity unleashed at a scale that defied German comprehension. The mechanical philosophy that had made Germany's armored forces legendary, the obsessive pursuit of technical perfection regardless of cost, was about to collide with a fundamentally different American approach: quality versus quantity. Engineering excellence versus mass production. Individual superiority versus overwhelming numbers. And in the fields of Normandy, among the hedgerows and farm roads of northern France, the mathematics of industrial warfare were about to teach the Wehrmacht a brutal lesson that the amount of technical superiority could overcome. By the time Becker's Panther engaged its first Sherman that morning, the outcome of the tank war in Europe had already been decided, not on drawing boards in Stuttgart or testing grounds near Berlin, but in the factories of Detroit, in the shipyards of Pennsylvania, in the vast industrial heartland of an America that German planners had catastrophically underestimated. The story of how German tank crews, piloting the most advanced armored vehicles in the world, were systematically overwhelmed by numerically superior but individually inferior. American tanks represents one of the most profound ironies of the Second World War. It reveals a clash not just of armies, but of industrial philosophies, of national character, of fundamentally different approaches to mechanized warfare. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. To understand the psychological shock that awaited German tank crews in Normandy, we must first understand the absolute confidence with which they entered battle. This confidence rested on 3 years of experience, on proven technical superiority, and on a tank design philosophy that prioritized individual vehicle excellence above all else. The Panther tank emerged from Germany's traumatic encounter with Soviet armor on the Eastern Front. When Operation Barbarossa commenced on June 22, 1941, German tankers driving Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs had been stunned to encounter the Soviet T-34 medium tank, with its sloped armor, wide tracks, and powerful 76-millimeter gun. The T-34 was superior to anything in the German arsenal. Hitler himself had demanded a response. In November 1941, he ordered the development of a new medium tank that would restore German superiority. The contract went to Maschinenfabrik Augsburg-Nürnberg, whose engineers created what many historians consider the finest tank design of the war. The Panther that entered production in January 1943 embodied German engineering excellence. It weighed 45 tons, powered by a Maybach 12-cylinder engine, generating 700 horsepower. The sloped frontal armor reached 100 millimeters at 55 degrees, creating effective thickness that no Allied tank gun could penetrate at normal combat ranges. But the Panther's true killing power lay in its main armament. The 75mm QWK 42 liters, 70 gun with its exceptionally long barrel and massive propellant charge, could penetrate 132 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters. In practical terms, a Panther could destroy any Allied tank from ranges where return fire was impossible. German tank crews trained extensively on these weapons. At the Panzer school at Bergen, near Hanover, aspiring commanders spent months learning not just to operate their vehicles but to understand the mathematics of armored combat. They studied penetration tables, angle calculations, range estimation. They learned that their Panther could engage enemy armor at 1,500 meters with reasonable probability of first-round kill. They learned that their frontal armor was effectively invulnerable to the American 75mm gun at any range beyond 300 meters. This training created supreme confidence. Lieutenant Friedrich Sander, who commanded a Panther in the 2nd Panzer Division, later recalled, "We believed ourselves invincible. Our instructors showed us intelligence photographs of American Sherman tanks, tall, ungainly, thinly armored. They told us 3 Shermans for every Panther, perhaps 4. We laughed. We thought the odds were in our favor." The Tiger heavy tank reinforced this sense of invincibility. At 57 tons, mounting the legendary 88mm gun, the Tiger could destroy enemy tanks at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. Its frontal armor measured 102 millimeters of vertical plate, while the sides carried 80 millimeters. Tiger Ace. Michael Wittmann became legendary for his single-tank action at Villers-Bocage on June 13, 1944. Encountering a stationary British armoured column, Wittmann destroyed over a dozen tanks and armoured vehicles in a matter of minutes, firing at point-blank range as he drove down the column. Stories like Wittmann's spread through German tank battalions, creating an aura of invincibility around German armour. The mathematics seemed irrefutable. German tanks had superior guns, superior armour, superior optics, superior training. How could they lose? What German tankers didn't understand, what their intelligence services had failed to grasp, was that the Americans weren't trying to build better tanks, they were building more tanks, far more tanks, an avalanche of tanks that would transform the nature of armoured warfare through sheer industrial mass. The M4 Sherman emerged from fundamentally different design priorities than German tanks. American engineers weren't trying to create the perfect tank, they were trying to create a tank that could be mass-produced, shipped across oceans, maintained by minimally trained mechanics, and operated by crews with limited experience. The Sherman design finalized in 1942 reflected these priorities. It stood 9 feet tall, making it an easy target but providing spacious crew compartment. It weighed 33 tons, light enough to cross most bridges and be transported by existing rail infrastructure. Its 75mm M3 gun was adequate against most targets, though woefully inadequate against German heavy armor. Most importantly, the Sherman was designed for production. Every component considered manufacturability. The welded hull could be assembled by workers with minimal specialized training. The engine, transmission, suspension components all came from existing automotive production lines or could be manufactured using conventional machine tools. Between February 1942 and July 1945, American industry produced 49,324 Sherman tanks. This number defies easy comprehension. At peak production in 1944, American factories were completing over 1,500 Shermans per month. That's 50 tanks per day, more than 2 per hour, around the clock, every day of the year. 11 different factories produced Shermans. The Chrysler Defense Arsenal in Warren, Michigan, purpose-built for tank production, alone manufactured 17,947 units in 6 different variants. Fisher Body, part of General Motors, produced thousands more. Ford, Pacific Car and Foundry, American Locomotive Company, Lima Locomotive Works, all converted to Sherman production. The scale was unprecedented. By comparison, Germany produced approximately 6,000 Panthers between January 1943 and April 1945. Total Tiger. One production reached only 1,347 units. The more advanced Tiger II, the Royal Tiger, achieved just 492 vehicles before production ceased. The mathematics were staggering. For every Panther Germany produced, America built 8 Shermans. Every Tiger, America manufactured 37 Shermans. And these numbers don't account for British, Canadian, and Soviet tank production, or for the fact that German factories operated under constant Allied bombing, while American production facilities remained completely untouched. But German intelligence consistently underestimated these production figures. Abwehr reports in 1943 estimated American tank production at perhaps 12,000 units annually. The actual figure was nearly 4 times higher. German military planners, operating from a mindset of scarcity and resource constraints, literally couldn't conceive of the abundance American industry could generate. This failure of imagination would prove catastrophic. German tactical doctrine assumed rough parity in numbers, with German technical superiority providing the decisive edge. But rough parity was never going to happen. The Americans were about to field armored forces on a scale Germany couldn't match, couldn't counter, and couldn't comprehend until it was far too late. When the first American tanks rolled off the landing ships onto the Normandy beaches on June 6, 1944, German tank commanders initially felt vindicated in their confidence. Early engagements seemed to confirm everything they'd been taught. Hauptmann Helmut Rittgen, operations officer of Panzer Lehr Division, recorded his first impression of Sherman tanks in combat near Tilly-sur-Seulles on June 8. 3 enemy tanks appeared at 800 meters range. Our Panthers engaged immediately. All 3 were destroyed with 5 shots. The American tanks burned furiously. Their crews had no chance. I remember thinking this would be easier than the Eastern Front. Similar reports flooded German command posts throughout June. Panthers and Tigers were destroying Shermans at ranges where American guns couldn't effectively return fire. The technical superiority German crews had been promised proved real and devastating. Statistics from late June showed individual German tanks achieving kill ratios that seemed to justify every confidence. Panthers engaging Shermans in open country were averaging 3 to 4 kills before being knocked out. Tigers were doing even better, some claiming 5 or 6 American tanks, but something was wrong. Despite these favorable kill ratios, German armored strength was declining. Panzer Lehr Division began the Normandy campaign on June 6 with 183 tanks and assault guns. By June 30th, only 74 remained operational. 2nd Panzer Division started with 127 armored vehicles. 3 weeks later, 62 were still running. The problem wasn't combat losses alone. It was attrition, mechanical failures, lack of spare parts, fuel shortages. A Tiger tank consumed hundreds of liters of gasoline per 100 kilometers. Panthers suffered chronic final drive failures that left them immobilized after just 150 kilometers of operation. And most critically, destroyed German tanks couldn't be replaced. Every Panther lost represented months of specialized manufacturing. Complex components like the transmission, the turret ring, the interleaved road wheels, each required specialized tooling and skilled labor that couldn't be improvised in the field. American tanks, by contrast, were treated as expendable. Destroyed Shermans were replaced within days, sometimes hours. The American logistical system was designed around the assumption of high attrition. Replacement tanks arrived on LSTs, landing ship tanks, directly from American ports. Repair depots in Normandy could swap out entire engines in under 2 hours, using standardized, interchangeable components. By late July, German tank commanders began reporting something they'd never encountered before, not in Poland, not in France in 1940, not even in Russia. They were being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. Lieutenant Friedrich Sander's combat report from July 25th captured the growing unease. Engaged enemy armor at 0930 hours near Saint-Lô, destroyed 4 Sherman tanks at ranges between 600 and 900 meters. As we repositioned, encountered 6 more enemy tanks approaching from different direction. Destroyed 3 before forced to withdraw due to fuel shortage. Estimate we faced 20 or more enemy tanks in this action alone. Our Technical superiority means nothing when we are outnumbered 5-1. The Battle of Aracourt in September 1944 provided the most dramatic demonstration of how numerical superiority could negate technical advantage. Newly formed German Panzer brigades, equipped with the latest Panthers, attacked positions held by the American 4th Armored Division, which fielded primarily 75mm Shermans. On paper, the Germans should have won decisively. They had better tanks, more experienced crews, defensive positions, but they faced nearly 3 times their number, in American armor, supported by fighter bombers that German tanks couldn't counter, and artillery that destroyed Panthers before they could engage. Over 6 days of fighting, the Germans lost approximately 140 Panthers and other armored vehicles. The Americans lost less than 30. Shermans, most quickly repaired and returned to service. The kill ratio that should have favored the Germans had inverted catastrophically. General Hasso von Manteuffel, commanding the 5th Panzer Army, wrote in his after-action report, "The American material superiority is devastating. They can afford to lose 4 tanks for every one of ours and still achieve victory. Our technical excellence is meaningless when we face such abundance of materiel." By autumn 1944, the psychological impact on German tank crews had become severe. Men who had entered Normandy confident in their superiority now faced each engagement with growing dread, not of enemy skill or courage, but of enemy numbers. Unteroffizier Karl Heinz, a Panther driver captured near Aachen in October, told his interrogators, "We destroyed so many of their tanks, 5, 6, 8 in a single day. But they kept coming. Always more. We would knock out 3 Shermans, and 4 more would appear. We'd retreat, resupply, return to the line, and face fresh American tanks, while ours were falling apart from mechanical strain. It was like fighting the ocean. This was the reality that German tank doctrine hadn't prepared for. Individual excellence, technical superiority, better training, all became irrelevant when facing an enemy who could absorb horrific losses and return the next day with more tanks than before. The Americans had transformed tank warfare into a war of industrial attrition, and in that war, Germany couldn't compete. The 3rd Armored Division's combat record tells the story in stark numbers. The division began the Normandy campaign with 232 M4 tanks. Over the next 11 months, through France, Belgium, and into Germany, the division saw 648 of its Shermans destroyed in combat. Another 700 were knocked out but repaired and returned to service, a cumulative loss rate of 580%. The division destroyed more tanks than it had started with, nearly 3 times over. Yet it never stopped advancing. Every destroyed Sherman was replaced, usually within 48 hours. Crews were rotated, fresh tanks arrived from ports at Cherbourg and Antwerp, and the division continued operations without pause. German panzer divisions couldn't sustain such losses. A single heavy panzer battalion with 45 Tigers represented months of production and training. Losing 15 or 20 Tigers in a week's fighting was catastrophic, not because the vehicles couldn't be replaced eventually, but because by the time replacements arrived, the tactical situation had completely changed. The Americans had discovered what German planners had refused to believe. In industrial warfare, quantity possessed a quality all its own. Mediocre tanks in overwhelming numbers, supported by unlimited fuel and ammunition, backed by repair facilities that could restore battle-damaged vehicles, overnight, proved more effective than small numbers of superior tanks operating at the end of fragile supply lines. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Battle of the Bulge, in December 1944, represented Germany's last desperate attempt to turn the tide through armored warfare. Adolf Hitler gambled everything on a massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes forest, concentrating nearly every operational Panther and Tiger in the West for one final crushing blow against the Americans. The plan was audacious. 3 German armies, spearheaded by elite SS Panzer divisions, would smash through thinly held American lines, drive to Antwerp, split the Allied armies, and force a negotiated peace. For this operation, Germany assembled its most powerful armoured force since Kursk, approximately 600 Panthers, 150 Tiger IIs, and hundreds of Panzer IVs. In the pre-dawn hours of December 16, 1944, German armour crashed into American positions along an 80-mile front. Initial success seemed to validate Hitler's sexist gamble. Inexperienced American divisions crumbled under the assault. Whole battalions surrendered. The Germans advanced 20 miles in some sectors, creating a massive bulge in Allied lines. SS Obersturmbannführer Jochen Paper, commanding Kampfgruppe Paper with some of Germany's newest Tiger, 2 heavy tanks, wrote in his operational log. First day exceeded expectations. American resistance collapsed. Our Tigers are invincible. The road to Antwerp lies open. But within 72 hours, the fundamental problem reasserted itself. The Germans were running out of fuel, while the Americans were bringing up reinforcements in staggering numbers. Every captured American supply dump revealed the shocking abundance of Allied resources. Cases of ammunition stacked higher than houses, fuel drums by the thousands, spare parts, rations, medical supplies, all in quantities German quartermasters had never seen in their entire careers. Obergefreiter Ernst Bachmann, a Panther commander with the 2nd SS Panzer Regiment, recalled the moment he truly understood Germany's predicament. His unit had overrun an American fuel depot on December 18th, near Bastogne. We found 300,000 litres of gasoline, just sitting there, enough to fuel our entire division for 2 weeks. The Americans had abandoned it, without destroying it, as if it meant nothing to them. I realized then that we were fighting an enemy for whom fuel shortages were literally inconceivable. The American response to the bulge demonstrated the full power of industrial mobilization. Within 48 hours of the German attack, General Dwight Eisenhower began redirecting armored divisions from across the front. The Third Army, under General George Patton, wheeled 90 degrees and drove north with 3 full armored divisions. The 7th Armored Division raced from Holland. The 2nd and 3rd Armored Divisions redeployed from the Ruhr River. By December 20th, 4 days into the offensive, the Germans faced 19 American divisions where they'd initially encountered 4. German intelligence had predicted it would take the Americans 2 weeks to mount an effective response. Instead, they'd accomplished it in 96 hours, moving thousands of tanks and hundreds of thousands of men through winter weather that should have made such movements impossible. The tide turned at Bastogne. The 101st Airborne Division, surrounded and vastly outnumbered, held the critical road junction for 7 days. German panzer divisions hammered the perimeter continuously, losing tanks they couldn't replace while American reinforcements gathered like storm clouds. On December 26th, Patton's 4th Armored Division broke through to Bastogne. The relief column included 375 Sherman tanks. The Germans opposing them fielded perhaps 80 operational Panzers, a mix of Panthers and Panzer IVs, many running on captured American fuel. The contrast was stark. American tank battalions that lost 10 or 15 Shermans in a single day's fighting received complete replacements within 48 hours. German Panzer companies that lost 3 or 4 tanks faced the rest of the campaign. Under strength, their losses permanent. Lieutenant Heinrich Hauer commanded a Panther platoon in the 9th SS Panzer Division. His combat diary from late December captured the growing desperation. December 27th, engaged enemy armour near Mannheim, destroyed 6 American tanks before forced to withdraw. My platoon now has only 2 operational Panthers from the 5 we started with on December 16th. No replacements available, no spare parts, limited fuel. Meanwhile, American tank columns pass our positions in seemingly endless procession. Where do they all come from? The answer, had Hauer known it, was from Detroit, from Pittsburgh, from Chicago, from the Chrysler tank arsenal that was still producing 50 Shermans per day, from the Fisher body plant running 3 shifts around the clock, from cargo ships that crossed the Atlantic in convoys so large they stretched to the horizon, carrying tanks, spare parts, fuel, ammunition, all the material abundance of American industry focused on a single purpose. By early January 1945, the bulge had been reduced and then eliminated. The Germans had lost over 600 tanks and assault guns in 3 weeks of fighting. Approximately 250 Panthers destroyed or abandoned, nearly 70 Tiger IIs knocked out or left behind when fuel ran out, hundreds of Panzer IVs wrecked in actions where they'd been outnumbered 5 or 10 to 1. American losses were heavier in absolute numbers, approximately 730 tanks destroyed, but every single one had been replaced. The American armored divisions that fought in the Bulge emerged stronger than they'd entered, with newer model Shermans, improved 76mm guns, better ammunition. The psychological impact on surviving German tank crews was devastating. These were men who'd been taught that one good German tank crew was worth 3 or 4 Allied tanks. They'd proven it true in combat, repeatedly. Yet they were still losing, steadily, inevitably, crushed under the weight of American industrial capacity. Hauptmann Werner Wolf, a Panther Company commander captured near Houffalize in January, provided remarkable testimony to his American interrogators. "We did everything right. Our gunnery was superior. Our tactics were superior. Our tanks were superior. We destroyed 4 American tanks for every one we lost in direct combat. Yet we lost. How do you defeat an enemy who treats tanks as expendable? Who loses 100 tanks in a week and replaces them all in 3 days? You taught us that war is production. That victory goes not to the best soldiers, but to the nation that can build the most weapons fastest." This was the fundamental lesson German tank crews learned in the hedgerows of Normandy, in the forests of the Ardennes, in the final desperate battles defending the Rhine. Technical excellence couldn't overcome industrial abundance. The carefully crafted, precisely engineered, expensively produced Panther and Tiger tanks were magnificent weapons. But they were weapons designed for a war of movement and maneuver, not for a grinding industrial slugfest where losses could be replaced overnight. American doctrine had accepted this reality from the beginning. Sherman tanks weren't designed to duel with Panthers and Tigers. They were designed to support infantry, to exploit breakthroughs, to destroy softer targets. When they did encounter German heavy armor, American tactics emphasized combined arms, using artillery, tank destroyers, fighter bombers, and sheer numbers to compensate for individual technical inferiority. The statistics tell a story more nuanced than the legend of German technical superiority suggests. A 1946 study by the U.S. Army's Ballistic Research Laboratory examined 30 armor-on-armor engagements between Shermans and Panthers. In 1944, the study found that Shermans achieved a 3.6 to 1 kill ratio against Panthers. This seems impossible given the Panthers' superior gun and armor. The explanation lies in tactical reality versus technical specifications. In actual combat, the first tank to spot the enemy and fire usually won, regardless of technical advantages. American tanks often had better operational readiness, better crew training in target acquisition, better coordination with supporting arms. Moreover, most tank losses in Normandy and beyond came not from other tanks but from anti-tank guns, mines, artillery, and close assault weapons. Panthers and Tigers, with their mechanical complexity and limited numbers, spent more time broken down or under repair than American Shermans, which were designed for ease of maintenance. A Panther's sophisticated interleaved road wheel, suspension, brilliant for weight distribution, became a nightmare when damaged. Replacing an inner road wheel required removing 5 or 6 outer wheels first, a job taking trained mechanics up to 10 hours in field conditions. A Sherman's simpler suspension allowed road wheel replacement in under 2 hours by a crew with basic tools. The Tiger's complex transmission, built to handle the tank's immense weight, required specialized tools and expert knowledge to repair. When Tigers broke down far from repair facilities, they were often destroyed by their own crews to prevent capture. Shermans could frequently limp back to friendly lines on damaged transmissions and be repaired by mechanics who'd worked on trucks and tractors before the war. This maintainability translated to operational availability. At any given time, in late 1944, approximately 62% of American Shermans were operational and combat-ready. For German Panthers, the figure ranged from 48 to 55%. For Tigers, It sometimes dropped below 40%. The mathematics were brutal. If a German Panzer division had 100 tanks on paper, 50 or 60 might actually be combat-ready on any given day. An American armored division with 250 tanks might field 170 or more, ready for action. Combined with faster replacement of losses, this meant American numerical superiority was even greater than raw production numbers suggested. By spring 1945, as Allied armies crossed the Rhine and drove into Germany proper, the disparity had become almost comical. American armored divisions rolled forward with hundreds of tanks in massive columns that stretched for miles. German Panzer divisions defending the fatherland sometimes fielded fewer than 20 operational tanks for entire sectors. The 2nd Panzer Division, which had begun the war with over 200 tanks in Poland, made its last stand near the Elbe River with 11 operational Panthers and 6 Panzer IVs. Facing them were elements of the 9th Armoured Division with over 300 Shermans, plus tank destroyers, self-propelled artillery, and air support that could be called in within minutes. Gefreiter Wolfgang Schmidt, a Panther loader who surrendered on April 14, 1945, near Magdeburg, spoke for thousands of German tankers when he told his captors, "What was the point? We could destroy 5 of your tanks and 10 more would appear. We could hold a position for 3 days and you would simply go around us with 100 tanks we couldn't possibly stop. The war was lost the day you decided to build tanks like Ford builds automobiles." The final accounting of tank production tells the story in numbers that German planners should have heeded years earlier. Total German tank and assault gun production from 1939 to 1945, approximately 51,000 vehicles of all types. Total American tank production in the same period, over 100,000 tanks, including nearly 50,000 Shermans, but raw numbers don't capture the full picture. American tanks came with spare parts, with trained maintenance crews, with fuel that flowed in, seemingly unlimited quantities from refineries in Texas and Oklahoma. They came with ammunition manufactured by factories running 24 hours a day. They came with radios that worked, with optics that could be replaced, with mechanical reliability that allowed units to plan operations, confident their tanks would start in the morning. German tanks, by 1944, came with promises of spare parts that never arrived, with fuel allocations that shrank every month, with ammunition rationed to 10 or 15 rounds per tank. They came with the knowledge that mechanical failure meant abandonment because recovery vehicles were prioritized for newer tanks. They came with the certainty that losses couldn't be replaced in any time frame that mattered operationally. The human cost of this industrial disparity was immense. German tank crews suffered approximately 75% casualty rates by war's end. Approximately 30,000 men who served in Panzers, Panthers, and Tigers were killed, wounded, or captured. Many died in tanks that were technically superior to anything they faced, killed not by enemy skill but by enemy abundance. American tank crews also suffered heavily. The 3rd Armored Division alone lost over 500 men killed and 2,000 wounded serving in tank crews. But their losses occurred in a context of eventual victory, of knowing that their sacrifices contributed to Allied advance. German tankers died, defending a cause already lost, in battles where numerical impossibility had replaced tactical challenge. The legend of German tank superiority persisted long after the war, fed by the combat records of aces like Michael Wittmann, Kurt Knispel, and Otto Karius. These men achieved genuinely remarkable kill counts, destroying hundreds of enemy tanks between them. But their individual excellence couldn't change the fundamental arithmetic of industrial warfare. Wittmann, with 128 tank kills and 122 anti-tank gun destructions, was eventually killed near Köln in August 1944, when his Tiger was overwhelmed by multiple Sherman Fireflies and Canadian tanks firing simultaneously from different directions. No amount of skill or technical superiority could overcome coordinated fire from enemies who could afford to lose 3 tanks to kill 1. The post-war analysis by military historians consistently reached the same conclusion. The Sherman tank won World War II, not by being better than German tanks in individual combat, but by being good enough in massive quantities. It represented the triumph of industrial pragmatism over engineering perfectionism, of quantity over quality, of sustainable production over technical excellence. This wasn't the narrative German tank designers wanted to hear. Men like Heinz Guderian, the father of Blitzkrieg, spent decades after the war arguing that with more Panthers and Tigers, Germany could have won. But the mathematics were inescapable. Even if Germany had somehow tripled Panther production, they would still have been outnumbered 3 or 4 to 1 by Shermans, and they lacked the fuel, spare parts, and industrial capacity to maintain larger armoured forces. The Sherman's true genius lay not in its gun or armour, but in its industrial design. Every Sherman component was engineered for mass production and field maintenance. The tank used a radial aircraft engine initially, then various diesel and gasoline engines, all readily available from existing production lines. The suspension was simple, the transmission was robust, the armour was adequate. Everything was designed around the principle that good enough, in large quantities, beats perfect in small numbers. By contrast, the Panther was a masterpiece of engineering that required specialized labor and materials. Its Maybach engine needed precision machining. Its transmission was a work of art that needed experts to build and maintain. Its interleaved suspension was brilliantly efficient but maintenance-intensive. It was a weapon designed to be the best tank on the battlefield, which it often was. But it wasn't designed to be mass-produced by an economy under sustained bombing and facing critical shortages of molybdenum, tungsten, and skilled labor. The Tiger was even more extreme. Each Tiger cost approximately 300,000 Reichsmarks to produce, twice the cost of a Panther and 4 times the cost of a Panzer IV. The resources needed to build one Tiger could produce 4 Stug assault guns or maintain 20 Panzer IVs in the field for a month. From a purely economic standpoint, Tiger production was almost irrational, absorbing scarce resources for marginal, tactical advantage. American economists studying German war production after the war were shocked by the inefficiency. Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, had attempted to rationalize production, to standardize components, to increase output through proven industrial methods. But he faced Hitler's personal intervention demanding more Tigers, more Panthers, more wonder weapons, regardless of production bottlenecks. The result was an armaments industry that produced remarkable individual weapons, but could never achieve the sustained mass production that modern war demanded. Germany produced 6,000 Panthers over 27 months of production. American industry produced 49,000 Shermans in 41 months. The disparity wasn't just in numbers, but in the entire industrial philosophy underlying production. For the men who fought in German tanks, the realization came gradually, painfully, through repeated combat experiences that contradicted everything they'd been taught. The moment when technical superiority revealed itself as strategically irrelevant. The moment when destroying 5 enemy tanks meant nothing, because 10 more appeared an hour later. The moment when fuel gauges approached empty, with no resupply expected. Feldwebel Kurt Müller, a Tiger commander who survived the war, wrote in his memoir published in 1968, "We believed in our tanks the way religious men believe in God. The Tiger was invincible, we were told. Its armor couldn't be penetrated, its gun could destroy anything, and this was true, technically. But technical truth meant nothing when we faced 30 American tanks with 3 of ours, when we ran out of fuel 50 kilometers from the depot, when our transmission broke and the recovery vehicle was destroyed by fighter bombers. We learned too late that the best tank in the world is the one that's there, that runs, that has ammunition and fuel, not the one sitting broken beside the road, however perfect its engineering." The final battles in Germany in April and May 1945 rendered the technical debate moot. German panzer divisions had ceased to exist as effective fighting forces. Scattered survivors defended river crossings or vital bridges with whatever vehicles still functioned. American armored divisions swept across Germany in racing columns, their Shermans advancing dozens of kilometers per day against scattered resistance. When the war ended on May 8, 1945, American armored forces in Europe fielded thousands of operational tanks. German Panzer forces had effectively ceased to exist. A few dozen Tigers and Panthers sat, abandoned for lack of fuel, their crews marching west to surrender to the Americans rather than the Soviets. The legacy of this armored confrontation shaped post-war military doctrine for decades. The American emphasis on industrial capacity, on sustainable production of adequate weapons in massive quantities, became the foundation of NATO planning during the Cold War. The concept that quantity has a quality all its own became military wisdom. But the legend of German technical superiority persisted, creating a peculiar historical irony. The tanks that lost the war, that were produced in numbers too small to matter strategically, became symbols of military excellence. The Sherman, which won the war through industrial might and sheer numbers, was often derided as inferior. This misses the profound lesson of armored warfare in World War II. The Sherman wasn't trying to be a better tank than the Panther. It was designed to be a tank that could be produced in quantities that made individual technical comparisons irrelevant. It represented a different philosophy of war, one that understood industrial capacity as the ultimate weapon. German tank crews in Normandy, in the Bulge, in the final defense of the Reich, learned this lesson at terrible cost. They learned that the finest tank in the world, crewed by the best-trained soldiers, couldn't overcome an enemy who could afford to lose tanks like ammunition. They learned that engineering excellence without industrial capacity was a dead end. They learned, too late, that in total war between industrial powers, the factory was as important as the battlefield. The contrast between German and American approaches to tank warfare illuminates broader truths about the conflict. Germany fought World War II as if it were still 1917, as if individual excellence and tactical superiority could triumph over industrial disparity. America fought it as a war of production, mobilizing industrial capacity on a scale the world had never seen. When Oberscharführer Hans Becker, the Panther commander we met at the beginning, finally surrendered near Remagen on March 11, 1945, he had destroyed 31 Allied tanks in 3 years of combat. His Panther, the third he'd commanded after mechanical failures destroyed the first 2, had proven itself superior in almost every engagement. Yet he was surrendering to an enemy whose tanks he'd consistently outfought, an enemy whose individual tank crews were often less experienced, whose vehicles were technically inferior. But that enemy had something Germany couldn't match: the industrial capacity to absorb horrific losses and return stronger, to replace destroyed tanks faster than they could be knocked out, to sustain combat operations with a logistical system that treated tanks as expendable. In his final entry in his combat diary, Becker wrote, "We won every battle and lost the war. Our Panthers were masterpieces. Their Shermans were sufficient. But they had 10,000 of sufficient, and we had hundreds of masterpieces. Mathematics defeated artistry. The assembly line defeated the drawing board." Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen. Now, and don't forget to subscribe. The unspoken truth of the tank war in Europe was that it ended not when German tanks became ineffective, but when Germany simply ran out of tanks, out of fuel, out of spare parts, out of time. The Panther and Tiger remained fearsome weapons until the final day of the war. But fearsome weapons without fuel are just expensive metal sculptures. American industrial philosophy proved itself superior, not because it built better tanks, but because it built enough tanks, enough to equip dozens of armored divisions, enough to replace catastrophic losses in days, rather than months, enough to make the question of individual tank quality strategically irrelevant. For German tank crews who believed they were piloting the finest armored vehicles ever built, the revelation that quality couldn't overcome quantity represented a psychological catastrophe as devastating as any military defeat. They had done everything right, fought with skill and courage, demonstrated technical and tactical superiority in countless engagements, and they had lost anyway, overwhelmed by an enemy whose greatest weapon wasn't better tanks, but more tanks. Always more tanks. An endless American tide of adequate armor that proved, definitively, that in industrial warfare, good enough in massive numbers will always defeat perfect in small quantities,